Hi, I'm Josh, the dad of hobbies. Today's hobby, Magneto. Specifically, what I call the Magneto problem. It was announced recently that Laurence Fishburne is interested in playing the role of Charles Xavier in the new MCU version of the X-Men. This is just baseless rumor. It's not like Marvel or Disney have announced this. This is just Fishburne saying that this is a role he'd be interested in. So I want to be clear, this is not a casting decision. It's just him expressing interest. But this has come up before. Laurence Fishburne, interested in Xavier. Giancarlo Esposito has expressed interest in playing Magneto. And obviously, these are both black actors who would be taking on a traditionally white role. I'm not going to get into whether or not that's okay. That's not the point here. The issue at hand for me is Magneto is especially problematic when you diversify the character, because Magneto came into fruition first X-Men number 1, 1963, and within about 15 years was made very much a quintessential character for representation of the Jewish culture. He was a Holocaust survivor. We saw this, of course, in the 2000 X-Men film with Bryan Singer directing and Sir Ian McKellen taking on the role, but that has been his character backstory for literally decades, at this point almost half a century. Chris Claremont was the one who introduced that, and not only was it shown that he was a Holocaust survivor, but later it was shown that he actually became a Nazi hunter after World War II ended. There are issues of him going to Holocaust memorial services and the Holocaust Museum in DC even. It is a very, very core central part of the character that Magneto is Jewish. And this matters not only for the character himself, but because the X-Men in general are meant to be pastiches of the othered concept, or society's outcasts, or people who were, as obviously the Jews were in the Holocaust, cast aside or shunned or judged, right? And this is very much essential to the X-Men lore, to the mutants inside the Marvel Universe, etc. So, if you make Xavier, or inherently Magneto, black, you take away that aspect of the character. That's not to say that there were not any black people that had to deal with the horrors of the Holocaust. There were black people in Europe at the time. But obviously they were not the main focus or target, right? And especially if you make Magneto or Xavier African American specifically, they are not European and therefore not part of the Holocaust, right? And so you have two problems there. One, you take away the inherent Judaic nature of the character, which is quintessential to the role, right? And what does that mean then for the character? How does the character drive his decisions and his wants and desires now as a grown man? And two, what audiences are now forced to do, even with an incredible actor like Fishburne as Xavier, or Esposito as Magneto, or anybody, any actor, any African American actor, or black actor, regardless of nationality, what audiences are now forced to do is make a choice on who had it worse. You end up playing trauma Olympics for the black community versus the Jewish community. And there's no winning in trauma Olympics, right? There's no, gold medal for the best trauma, right? So audiences are either forced to ignore what they know, even non-comic book fans, right? They're forced to ignore what they know about the character in order to accept this new version, or they will struggle to accept it because they recognize that this is a massive change beyond skin tone. And that is inherently problematic. Now, the flip side of this is, if you keep Magneto as a Holocaust survivor, you now run into a time problem, because not only is the MCU very clearly set in current day, we also live in current day, right? And Holocaust survivors are not getting any younger. In fact, right, if you do the math here really quickly, World War II ended in 1945. We are now in 2025. For those of you who don't want to do that math, that is 80 years. And so that means that the youngest person, right? Somebody born in 1945 would have been 80 today, right? So you'll certainly have people older than that, but they're hitting their 90s, maybe even 100 years old. You cannot have a 100-year-old Magneto on screen. It just doesn't work. Comic books have sort of gotten around this by saying, oh, you know, part of having the mutant gene is you age slower, and okay, that works a little bit. You might be able to play that a little bit in the movies, but keep in mind that the movies need younger actors because Disney and Marvel want these actors to have longevity in the franchise, and the mutants for the Marvel Cinematic Universe are meant to be reintroduced, so it's meant to be a new, you know, line of mutant stories. So you have to have a younger actor. So saying, oh, this actor who looks barely 30 is actually 80 or 90 years old doesn't really work that well. So now you have another problem with the audiences buying what you're selling. Or you pull an older actor like they did with McKellen, and you now struggle to find a way to continue that, right, if the actor is actually that older. Or you go the route of what we described earlier, which is that you have an actor who is of a different cultural origin, and we come back to who had it worse. The third option here is that you do the X-Men in the MCU without Magneto and therefore without Xavier entirely. And that could work. You could introduce mutants who we have not seen from the previous Fox films. You could do different types of stories. You know, the multiverse concept is coming, you know, well in hand in Marvel's Cinematic Universe now. But ultimately, the X-Men kind of center around Xavier and Magneto and the philosophies of those two men. There are definitely characters, certainly, that I love that they haven't really explored. Frankly, I think Cyclops was done dirty over the last 20 years, personally. But in general, you got to come back to those two at some point. And there's not a good way to do that that doesn't either change drastically the origins of X-Men and mutants and what that means for those characters, or do it in a way that audiences will struggle to buy. And I'm not Kevin Feige, I'm not Marvel, I'm not Disney. I don't have to solve this problem, but it is a problem. And it's not a problem because they're going to cast a black actor. It's not a problem because they have made too many movies. You can get past all of that. It's how you do it in a way that not only tells a good and effective character-driven story, but does it in a way that at best, or I guess at minimum, makes your audience understand the difference in the choice you're making, and doesn't, at worst, alienate them, right? And Magneto is uniquely suited for this because unlike Captain America, for instance, who obviously also served in World War II, it's very easy to slide that time scale. Oh, he was frozen for 70 years or 80 years or 90 years, right? You just keep it going, right? Magneto wasn't frozen. He's lived. And that lived experience is crucial to who he is. And if you take away the Jewish aspect, if you take away the Holocaust aspect, what does that mean for the character? And then if you add in different cultural tragedies and horrors, even if it's not African American specifically, and it's not civil rights, let's say it's trauma from an African nation or the Rwanda conflict or anything, right? Any sort of cultural conflict that's different than what he has, you run into the trauma Olympic problem. And I don't know that there's a good way to get around that. So that's it. That's the Magneto problem. All that being said, if Laurence Fishburne wants to play Xavier, I'm certainly not going to stop him because the man's fantastic. And it's Marvel and Disney's problem to solve in that aspect. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Please feel free to like, follow, subscribe to see what hobby we dive into next. Thanks so much.